Shabbat Shalom, and this is 10 minutes of Torah. Not two new Jews in the world, and not a 75-year-old man wandering from his homeland into a land he doesn't know, but 10 minutes of Torah. Well, this week's Torah portion is called Lech Lecha, and we have been introduced in last week's Torah portion to the figures of, as they are now called, Abram and Sarai. But in this week's Torah portion, God calls out to Abram, and God says, Lech lecha me'artzecha. Abram, I want you to go from your land to this other land that I'm going to show you. God doesn't even name the land yet. Of course, it's going to be the land of Israel, which is then called Canaan. But Abraham agrees. He goes. And God says to Abraham the following beautiful blessing. God says to Abraham, I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. Beautiful blessing. We're going to ask a question about it a bit later on. Well, once they're settled in the land of Israel, a bit of foreshadowing goes on. There is a famine in the land, and to find food, Abraham or Abram and Sarai go down to Egypt. Very similar to what's going to be going on much later in Genesis with the children of Jacob and the famine in the land, and going to Pharaoh. Abraham or Abram is concerned, though, because his wife Sarai is beautiful. And he's afraid that Pharaoh will have him killed so that he can then take Sarai into his, group of wives. But having been told that Sarai is Abraham's sister, he takes her into his house anyway. And after he does so, guess what happens to Pharaoh? A bunch of plagues come. It doesn't tell us again what the plagues are, but foreshadowing, plagues come. And Abraham then admits to Pharaoh, well, she actually is not my sister, she's my wife. And Pharaoh, of course, is not very happy about this, and he sends them away. When they return to the land of Israel, Abram again still, his nephew Lot has been captured by a bunch of local chieftains. Abram, I keep saying Abraham, it's hard because most of the time he will be Abraham. He rescues Lot. A sense of calm is returned to the land. And then a covenant is made between God and Abraham called Brit Ben Habitarim, the covenant between the pieces, because it involves pieces of animals, frankly, and that's why it is called Brit Ben Habitarim. Since Sarai is barren at this point, she gives her handmaiden Hagar to Abram, and Hagar bears him a son named Ishmael. That will come into play later, but not this week. Finally, the parsha ends with another covenant. Maybe it's a confirmation of the earlier covenant. Maybe it's a new one, a renewal. But Abraham and Sarai during this covenant will have their names changed. So Abram, I can finally call him by the full name, Avraham. And Sarai becomes Sarah. What has happened to their names? The letter He, which stands for God, has been added to it. So now we have the first two Jews. Their relationship with God is beginning to form. And of course, I call them Jews. They're really Israelites or Hebrews. But in any case, the first two Jews come into the world. As a symbol of this covenant, Abraham and all of the males in his entourage are circumcised. That indeed means that from then on, every Jewish male has to be circumcised to be a part of the covenant. It's a symbol of the covenant. You're still Jewish if you're not circumcised. I know that's a surprise to some people. But More important than that, it is a sign of the covenant, the circumcision. Now, let's go back to Abraham's promises from God and his name changing. Later on, we already heard about Abraham being a blessing, and the families of the earth are going to bless themselves through Abraham. In the second covenant, God says, I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. Now, what does that mean exactly? Abraham is our father, if you will, our ancestor. But the truth be told, if you take the three great Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, Abraham really is the father of all of those. And, pardon me, a little bit of a cold this week. Abraham is the father of great nations. Between Muslims and Christians and Jews, there's over 2 billion of those, although most of those are Muslims and Christians, and very few, about 16, 17 million, are Jews. Well, how is it that Abraham is the father of a multitude of nations? Is it because these Western religions come out of Abraham? You know, of course, the accords that were signed a number of years ago between Israel and neighboring countries, what are they called? The Abraham Accords. Because Judaism comes from Abraham, Christianity comes from Judaism, and while Islam doesn't come directly from Judaism, Abraham is certainly seen as one of their ancestors. So the Abraham Accords does indicate, pardon me, that Abraham is the founder of nations, but doesn't really teach us something all that profound about Abraham. But there is something the rabbis picked up on. They said that Abraham had a quality that made him worthwhile in establishing this covenant. What was that quality? Sorry again. What was that quality? That quality was chesed, kindness. Abraham's kindness made him a unique individual. And according to the rabbis, they taught that making Abraham the father of a multitude of nations had nothing to do with other religions, but rather that anyone who themselves are kind and righteous can be called a descendant of Abraham. Now think about that for a moment. Judaism has never said that only righteous people are Jews. It recognizes that every religion, every people in the world can have righteous people. They have to, of course, be righteous, right? They have to abide by certain standards, like not murdering and stealing and some things that are in the Ten Commandments. But they don't have to be Jewish or even one of those great Western religions. Now, what a remarkable comment that is on the person who is the founder of Judaism. Abraham is not just the founder of nations, but the role model for all religious people. Abraham, indeed, is not just the first person to believe in one God. Because belief in one God doesn't matter if God is not ethical and kind and righteous in God's own qualities, if you will. Rather, ethical monotheism reminds us that it's not one God, but one God who is moral, who is kind, who does all of those important things. And Abraham, in imitating God, if you will, or maybe just internally, has this great sense of chesed, of kindness. So Abraham, as the first practicer, as the first believer in ethical monotheism, his own kindness reminds us that at least as important as the concept of one God is the understanding that this one God is ethical and kind, as is Abraham. By not simply believing in that, but also modeling it, Abraham has been merited. Abraham has now merited being renamed by God and as someone whom all righteous people will follow. Well, this has been 10 Minutes of Torah, not two new Jews in the world, and not a 75-year-old man wandering, and not a rabbi coughing a lot, but 10 Minutes of Torah. Shabbat Shalom.